we were building something impactful to the bottom line, even though the user experience didn't change at all.
Everything you did had a rock solid implementation that can set you up for a new future to continue to scale and grow quickly.
Shopify is very well architected, from the API design, the infrastructure plan, again, like hydrogen and oxygen working together. Super, super excited for Shopify to be a point to really revisit beliefs that we've built about how we need to run as a business. Maybe we can try something else, and Shopify allows us to do that with less risk.
David, great to see you.
Hey, Ben. Nice to see you.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
We're official now. ButcherBox live on Hydrogen. It feels like we've been a lot building up to this over the last year or so, and so I'm really looking forward to having this chat today.
We even had an awesome launch yesterday where we launched the Remix implementation of our sign-up flow.
Nice!
We launched the Shopify checkout a few months ago, but this is Remix on.
Oh, cool! So let's actually dig into that. You've done this in a phased approach.
Yeah, so when we got started, our first big deliverable was, okay, customers should be able to purchase subscriptions in Shopify. And we realized that we could phase that in by wiring up the Shopify checkout to our existing sign-up flow in Gatsby. And that's what we've been running with since prior to Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And now we're fully onto Hydrogen, fully onto Remix for the entirety of the acquisition funnel.
Okay, we always dive right into it, but maybe just to rewind back for people who haven't been watching our personal conversations for last year, do you want to say your name and your role at ButcherBox, and then let's give me a tight story on ButcherBox overall for the few people who aren't familiar?
Sure, yeah. My name is David House. I'm a principal engineer at ButcherBox, and I've been here for about 4 years, which makes me ancient in the ButcherBox timeline.
In tech in general, anybody developers anywhere, I think 4 years is a substantial amount of time. It moves fast.
For sure.
There's a whole bunch of things I wanted to talk about, but you brought it up right away. It's something I wasn't expecting, but I think is most interesting, which was taking this incremental approach towards adopting Shopify, still with the eyes at leveraging as much as you could, and doing that in phases. And I think what's been really cool about witnessing your team has been how rigorous y'all have been in just striving towards, I'm assuming there's, like anyone, tech that you've accumulated, things you've tried that you've learned from, and it really seemed like you wanted to, everything you did have a rock solid implementation. And so around that can set you up for a new future to continue to scale and grow quickly. I'm curious, when you were doing that first, evaluation of Shopify overall, what was your perception then? Were you excited? How has that evolved over time, and what have you learned? And then, I think that digging a little bit more into that transition and some of those motivations, it would be really great to learn more about.
So I think there's one part of this question, which is how did we make the evaluation that Shopify was going to be a solid platform for us from a technical standpoint? And then there's the second part, which is sort of how did we ramp up on Shopify and build a stable foundation, given that nobody at ButcherBox had any experience with the latest and greatest Shopify features, right? So I got really excited about Shopify in the very early days of our sort of migration planning, because I could see that Shopify was embracing edge execution, but not only edge execution, but edge execution with co-located data. So the storefront API was solving one of the hardest problems to solve when it comes to running a front end at the edge. Additionally, just having the rock solid foundation of the Shopify checkout was a huge deal for us, because checkouts are really, really hard to get right if you don't have a team that's really dedicated to stability and handling all the edge cases that happen in there.
And that's where you started with checkout, you're saying. Maybe could you rewind and tell us, you don't have to give us all the details, but a little bit about your setup before? I think I know it was a pretty custom, bespoke thing to y'all, and I'm curious about how you felt bringing that to Shopify. And did you feel like you had all of the flexibility you needed to keep your workflows, keep the system designs and approaches and, developer ergonomics, all those things that you already, the good parts of what you had before? Did you feel like you had to compromise, or was it actually flexible enough? And what was that adjustment like?
Yeah, so we really wanted to have a cohesive brand experience for our customers. We didn't want them to feel like they were having one experience in the sign-up flow and then sort of a different experience on the member side. Both of those are huge growth drivers for us. So we wanted to make sure that we had a very consistent brand experience. And what that means from a technology standpoint is you really need to be able to control pretty much everything about how the UI presents itself. That was what drove the business into consolidating around the Jamstack and deploying with a static first framework. But I think while the sort of motivations of going headless and the motivations of going static were around performance, and the problem that we ended up encountering pretty quickly was that static is really hard to make dynamic. And if we ever wanted to add A/B testing, if we ever wanted to add personalization, that meant that we lost all of the benefits of a statically rendered page and a statically hosted page. I think where we were really excited to get into Remix because most of our pages are dynamic by default because we have an A/B test running on pretty much every single page.
There's a lot of different ways to build, but mostly they're general purpose. It's for building everything, and then mostly for marketing focused sites. Like versus it's a technology product. It's mostly static, and commerce is this really interesting flavor. And there's no one that's really building a dedicated stack for it. Especially, dynamic was important when we started, but we think it's just going to become increasingly important, especially as customer acquisition costs continue to rise, and you have to get more and more sophisticated in order to eke out every dollar you can and give people an experience that feels enticing and compelling and bespoke to them. And that's just a level of expectation from the customer that's going to continue to increase. And so that was really our fundamental belief. And when we brought on the Remix team, that was really driven by that too, because they had those same shared principles and had done such an incredible job at building a framework. And so that for us to build the Shopify toolset on top of that with Hydrogen and the hosting with Oxygen, it was all based around how do we take what Remix is doing with the framework and fill it out with all the other pieces of, yes, our images and assets are at the edge, and at the same edge we have our data, and at the same edge we have these actual applications running dynamically. And so, yeah, exact same motivations. You were talking about checkout before. I'm curious. So where y'all at now? What's your dream state? And maybe let's just start with there. Like how what's that been like for you? Because you said that went live a couple of months ago.
Yeah, for sure. So prior to moving to Shopify, if you had asked me that question, I would say well, our dream state for checkout is for customers to have a good experience on it, because that wasn't always the case. Checkout pages can get really complex. The state management within sort of a single page checkout can be really tricky to get right. Customers will find every single way of navigating through your interaction paths, ones that you could never have imagined, not to mention all the complexity of collecting payment from your customers. I'd say that while it was tricky to migrate from sort of a subscription creation flow where we had the entire API surface and we could say go or no go with our own APIs, migrating from that to a webhook based flow. We don't worry about the checkout at all today. So once we know that the customer has entered checkout, they're good to go. And we trust that they'll be able to get through it without a problem.
And are you using like, hey, checkout it's handled, or have you tapped into customizing it all through checkout extensibility, which is our new way of being able to customize that? And how's that looking for you? And or what are your plans there?
Yeah, we're super excited about checkout extensibility. I think some of my colleagues might be a little weary hearing me reference it so many times. Like it sounds like it's going to be the thing that opens up so every single possibility, but that's because it really creates the extension points that we need and nothing more. Right? We're not using extensibility now, but we're super excited to migrate to it. I can see a lot of problems that we have to solve. That extensibility is the perfect solution for it, both between UI extensions, Shopify functions, as well as the branding API. Not having to write CSS.
Right. Great. If you could just snap your fingers and get one of those, like the one extension today, what's the top on your list?
I might not be the only one who would say this at ButcherBox, but for me, it would be Shopify functions, hands down.
What's really so exciting about that for you?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the cart validation API. We've talked about how like it was really important for us to have control over the full extent of our stack in order to maintain a consistent brand experience. But it's also super important from the standpoint of ensuring that our customers weren't aware of the fact that we were migrating to Shopify, right? We wanted to give them the exact same experience pre and post. And that means that there's a lot of sort of complexity that we have associated with the cart. A lot of states that the cart can get into that we might have trouble working with, might require a customer support person to reach out to that customer. And, we have a fantastic customer support team, but I would love to kind of take some of that load off of their plates and validate the cart prior to entering checkout. Additionally, I think having the ability to do custom discounts would be huge for us because we have so many different kind of complex merchandising patterns that if we had the ability to implement a custom discount, then that would allow us to deliver on not only what we do today very cleanly and efficiently, but much more than we can do today.
All right, let's talk about those the craziness of the cart and the merchandising. ButcherBox is, for anybody who doesn't know, a very interesting flow and setup, and really dialed in from a subscription standpoint. And I don't even know if I want to know what it was like in the past with you, but you were coming to Shopify. We have these subscription APIs. We have a number of different applications and providers out there that give you stuff out of the box. You guys decided to build a custom app just for you. I know it's your bread and butter, so I think I'm understanding that this is the one thing we have to win at. So I'm curious to hear about your architecture for that, what it was like working with the Shopify's APIs and your approach to building that, and would you do it again? And the second thing is really around taking the subscription APIs and then marrying it with the building of your cart. And I'm curious especially to learn about how you ended up doing the merchandising piece, because it's not like you're buying a t-shirt. You are building a box of different units of meat, and there's a whole bunch of craziness that's going on there that I don't even think qualifies as what people would call a bundle. It's like some other sort of new term.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of our sort of architecture evolution into Shopify, I'd say we were in a really advantageous position when it comes to custom subscription app um, functionality, because in many ways we already had a custom subscription app. Um, for the last few years, we've had our own subscription API that has evolved to sort of further and further encapsulate some pretty tricky technical debt, um, and that has been running in production for a few years. Um, the When we initially were thinking about subscription, we had a question of like, okay, do we go with a third-party subscription app, or do we find a way to make it work with what we have? And I think there was a sense that it was going to be easier to swap our payment provider and our subscription provider with our existing subscription app than it was going to be to migrate the entire sort of member experience onto a different subscription API.
So you brought the same application over and sort of rewired some things. That's
right.
I didn't actually realize that. I thought you built a whole new thing. That's really cool. You were able to not have to throw away all that work.
Yeah, exactly. And, in hindsight, I'm really, really glad that we made that decision. I am sure that there are a lot of businesses out there planning a Shopify migration for whom that wouldn't make sense. But for us, given that given that so much of our revenue comes from sort of incremental merchandising to members, and that so much traffic, so much sort of API traffic happens on like product listing pages and for members. For example, we have flash sales for members where you only see the page if you're subscribed, and we'll have thousands of people log into them at the same time, and they'll be constantly adding and removing items from their upcoming order. We've had a lot of success with that. And in that process, so many of those complex, bespoke merchandising behaviors are already implemented. So we are able to optimize for user experience quality. We're able to optimize for load speed. We're able to kind of shelter our traffic from API rate limits on Shopify by having our own custom subscription app.
Okay, and then the merchandising thing, I'm definitely curious. What was the approach that you took to model out how your products are built that ultimately feed into the subscription API, that ultimately feed into a cart, that ultimately go to our checkout?
Yeah, I can tell you that this is a pretty deep rabbit hole, so I'll spare.
Let's do the Cole's notes, or just the good parts, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So Shopify gave us the opportunity to really start from first principles when it came to our product model. We were able to go from having many sort of duplicative representations of our products on the site, which added a lot of complexity, to saying we've got a product for bacon, that's bacon. If the price of bacon changes, then the price of bacon changes. And that is what everyone has wanted for a long time prior to coming to Shopify, but Shopify gave us the opportunity to actually implement those behaviors. So, we sell, in terms of our product model, we sell a lot of boxes. So we decided to model the idea of a box. Within that box, you can have individual picks that you decide to purchase. You can also have bundles, which are made up of multiple picks. So that's really our model. We've got boxes, bundles, and picks.
Cool. Okay. Let me get this straight. So you, at some point, switch over to Shopify. First move is adopt the checkout. In order to do that, you go and build out your own, hey, here's how we want products to be reassembled in our business that we've always dreamed of. You're able to achieve that with our standard products as the basic units, and then meta objects to create your own content model to structure stuff on top. You bring over your existing subscription app, and I'm assuming it's not just a quick copy paste. There's a little bit of tweaking in there too. And then you're still on, but still doing all of that with the website part on Gatsby. And so This is actually all a new story for me. We've always had in-depth talks about like caching and stuff and Hydrogen APIs, and much less about the story before that. But it's really cool to hear this incremental, like composable adoption thing, and then you keep your headless architecture. It's making a lot of sense to me. Why? Because you need to query all these APIs on the server, and you're bringing that together, and you are now, as of you said yesterday, on a Hydrogen with Remix and deployed onto Oxygen. Maybe let's get into that. I did sort of the reverse chronology, but turns out that's actually the correct chronology, but the opposite way of how other people would have maybe approached it. Now let's get into the Hydrogen part. Tell me a little bit about that. I'm curious about, feel free to be honest with your feedback on anything I can improve, but curious on what that's been like. Why did you choose to go with that approach versus, there's other frameworks out there that can also do dynamic things. You can host elsewhere too. I'm so, keen to learn about that and before we get into the feature.
So from a timeline perspective, it's even a little broader than that. And I think I want to get into sort of the first thing that we did in Shopify, because I think it really helped set us up for success in migrating subscription. The first thing that we launched was our gifting box flow. This made up a small percentage of our business, and we realized okay, we don't know Shopify really at all. We don't know Hydrogen at all. Let's take a small but sort of end-to-end part of our business, move that onto Shopify and move that onto Hydrogen, and make all of the mistakes that you're going to make the first time you ever integrate with a new platform, right? And that's exactly what we did. We made a bunch of mistakes. We learned a bunch of lessons, and that was what really helped us kind of get the much larger part of our business, i.e., subscription, migrated in a way that we're really happy with. So you made mistakes, but then you said, we're going to do this again. So it was obviously not too many mistakes where it was we're going to go in a different direction. So what made you re-up and continue down that path? I mean, to be clear, the mistakes are not on you. The mistakes are on us. And I think it's just, I've heard some people say that you should write everything twice, right? And I think that really served us well. So I think from a Hydrogen standpoint, I think one of the biggest value adds to Hydrogen is sort of its marriage with Hydrogen Oxygen, right? Having the co-located execution and data is really important to us. The caching layer was super important to us as well. We don't only make requests to Shopify, for example, so we'll also make requests to our headless CMS. We make requests to our A/B testing provider to be able to get the data that we need in order to resolve feature flags and experiments before the page is rendered. All of these things we use caching with. They're all using the fantastic stale while revalidate tools that we get from the Hydrogen package, and that's been fantastic because prior to that, anytime someone went to a page that might have had some dynamic content, might have had an A/B test, they would have to see a loading spinner at best in just one small part, but at worst in the entire page if we needed to test something at the top level.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, hey, why not? So you just answered the question I was gonna ask, which is maybe left unsaid was you're doing all of that on the server, and you're caching all of that on the server in a shared cache, so that you can keep the performance benefit of static while still maintaining that dynamism throughout. And why not just do it on the client side, make it a spa, do your queries, the loading spinners, and making sure that just feels like as snappy as possible.
Yeah, this was especially important for sort of the second group of pages that we migrated to Remix, which were our affiliate landing pages and our sort of paid ad landing pages. You need those to load as quickly as possible. And if they're static, then great, go with static. But none of our landers are static. They all have A/B tests on them.
We've also adopted, I think you guys have too, some features. When you first started building, these were very new in React 18, which was like streaming and defer. Remix's defer utility has been awesome in making that really nice. I think you guys have leaned into that too. I'm assuming that gets pretty critical in personalization.
Yeah, for sure. So our first sort of foray into Hydrogen was in Hydrogen v1. And I think that was our first try into figuring out, like, okay, how do we model components with suspense and with streaming in a way that's going to work really, really well? As we've moved into Remix, we've been focusing more on like, all right, let's just get the pages working, and then we'll add the streaming support, we'll add suspense, we'll add fallbacks. I think the thing that we're paying a lot of attention to is how do you add streaming support and how do you add suspense without creating a lot of sort of jank in the UI where things are moving around a lot, right? How do you improve time to first paint without hurting your cumulative layout shift? And I think from a component organization standpoint, that's been really interesting to think about. We have 4 teams that are working in Remix right now. So all of our solutions have to be at least in part intuitive in order to be able to scale across the teams.
So moving to Shopify, I'm curious, what's been the biggest overall impact in moving to Shopify so far? And let's start with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's simplicity and conversion rate. The two best things that we could have hoped for, right?
So yeah, maybe like one layer deeper than that. I was
sure
to building on those two things. What has simplicity and conversion rate meant for the impact on the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think the business has folks more broadly in ButcherBox have wondered, why is it taking so long to get onto Shopify? I thought that Shopify was this thing that you could just sort of plug and play. And I think that I think when you're building headless, like there is more complexity that you take on. You get the flexibility as well, and you get the reliability. But I think it's been really helpful from a conversion rate perspective to say like, okay, like this really meant something. Like we were building something that was impactful to the bottom line, even though the user experience didn't change at all. We had an awesome Q4, I think in part because of Shopify, in part because of the technology under the hood. So as an engineer, that makes me really happy because I think it's plain. It's very plain to see, looking at Shopify's architecture, all of the things that you all are doing right. It's very hard sometimes to explain why that stuff is important to a non-technical audience, but
right.
It's very easy to say like, hey, conversion rate increased. We didn't change the UX, so there's some awesome stuff under the hood here.
Yeah, right. And because of the scale your team's at, the operations you had and wanted, the way you wanted a solution to fit into your ideals, and then which then meant requiring server control. That's where the need for headless and then your existing dev team, what your dev skills already were, the workflows you wanted to do, the end-to-end testing. You go and do, you have tons and tons of tests, which are super rigorous, and I don't know if you ever ship bugs as a result. But so I think for the folks watching, hey, why didn't you go with a faster path and get to launch right away and do a more hosted solution? That was sort of the requirements that drove you there, while still as you said, you didn't change UX at all. You want to minimize the risk of change going from something that was working great. You're a great business already off Shopify, and you want to take that further. Maybe simplicity side, I'm curious about what do you mean by simplicity? And let's dig into that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Remix is such a big part of this. Hydrogen is such a big part of this. Shortly after we launched with Shopify, I had to go in and try to debug a really kind of tricky race condition that was happening with like network requests to our A/B testing provider, and like why was that resulting in data being saved to local storage in a way that we wouldn't expect. All of this was in Gatsby. All of this was in our sort of SPA architecture. We don't have those problems in Remix. So the fact that we can focus more on, build it once with web standards and then use it repeatedly without having to worry about tricky server-client communication issues or client to other server communication issues, it takes a lot of the sort of platform simplicity and increases simplicity. So we can spend more time working on features that are actually impactful to our customers.
The thing that I hear with people adopting a Remix all the time is this word that I never really heard people say before that. And it's weird that it's hit everybody's mind, which is there's so much that they have to unlearn because of all these idioms that are built on top of the web platform that are like abstractions somewhere else. And that's the thing we loved about Remix was like, we're using this thing and majority of the time we're spending our time in like Mozilla docs looking up web APIs, not in how does this vendor do this thing. And I think that's been so cool how simple the tools are and stripped back that actually enable more power and flexibility because they just lean into, hey, the web already gives you this stuff, just go do it. It's always cool to hear just the same, all these people independently saying the same thing. As a developer, mostly focusing on a storefront, what is it about working with Shopify that's so appealing, and how does what we build, our product, support the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Shopify is very clearly very well architected. I can see that from the API design. I can see that from the infrastructure plan, again, like hydrogen and oxygen working together. I can see that in sort of the features that you just love to see as a developer, like deploy previews and easily modifiable environment variables and lots of great docs out there. Shopify.dev is probably one of my most visited sites just after GitHub. But I think the impression that I got, looking at Shopify when we were evaluating other e-commerce platforms is, well, like if I had limited time and money, I would build Shopify. Like I would take the same decisions that you all had taken around hosting your storefront at the edge and co-locating your data and using a server rendered framework and ensuring that you could do a dynamic site that wasn't going to be blown away in load speeds by static, right? When you have a site that's as dynamic as ours, like you build it like Shopify built it. And I think that's if I were building an e-commerce platform today, I would do exactly what you all did.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's awesome to hear. You said this earlier in our chat, which was it's a great idea to write it twice or something along those lines. And we actually have a similar thing where we have these prototype phases before we get into build, and really trying to approach it from like, hey, delete I think at one point apparently it used to auto delete your code after the prototype phase, so you had to go start it again. But definitely that mentality. For people who maybe don't have the luxury of doing that, or want to have even their first go be a little bit better, curious, what were some of those lessons that you learned? And are there any lessons in general from your experience that you could help offer other developers that are either interested in working with Shopify, come from a similar custom stack to yours, and just advice that you'd give based on that?
So I think if I look back on sort of the lessons that we learned in our prototype phase, um, they were really lessons sort of around the margins and lessons around scalability of our organization. Our first prototype was built by one team, but we needed to make sure that multiple teams had the opportunity to contribute. And I think that's where we learned the most of our lessons. I'm sure that if we had continued with our single team and building out the rest of our site, that there wasn't very much that we would have had to rework. I'd say the things that we did that we didn't change at all, the things that we got right from the start, were really embracing TypeScript and really embracing generated types from GraphQL APIs.
Which I
Prior to
know we didn't do for you. Now we do out of the box, but we didn't originally, so you had to set up all this yourself. But yeah, anyway, thank you for that too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad to see that Hydrogen supports that use case now, because when I look back to how we were building on Hydrogen prior to using type-safe GraphQL responses, all of our bugs were type errors, because you might fetch more data here, you might fetch less data here, and you really needed to be sure of what data you had access to at any given time. And that's exactly what's enabled by the various tools out there for generating types from a GraphQL API. The other thing I think we've been really happy with that we embraced in Hydrogen was a tool called Vanilla Extract, which allows us to write type-safe CSS. I know there's a lot of opinions out there about CSS and JS. I think for our organization at the level of scale that we're at, we really wanted to have sort of a public API of CSS and a private API of CSS. We wanted there to be one way to do it. So we have a component library that doesn't allow you to do everything in CSS, but allows you to do enough. And Vanilla Extract helps us do that.
And I assume you knew this, but Mark, who actually wrote that, is on the Remix team now, working at Shopify too, and we support that out of the box too with Hydrogen, which is really cool. I'm more of a Tailwind guy myself, but that's to each their own, and I love Vanilla Extract too. I'm actually curious, maybe the same question, but specifically focusing in on bringing custom software that you already have and integrating that with Shopify, thinking about your subscription product. Any lessons there, and maybe not subscription specific, but other companies looking at Shopify saying, hey, we'd love to do it, but I got all this custom stuff that we actually really like. How can they be successful in making that switch?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this really comes down to sort of how do you think about your system as a distributed system, rather than thinking about certain parts of your application as intrinsic to your front end or intrinsic to your back end. If you have pieces that are working well for you and you want to carry them into Shopify, there are a number of different patterns that you can take in order to create that interoperability. And all of this sort of comes from the lessons that we've learned about how you operate a distributed system at scale. We think a lot about API interfaces for things like this. We heavily leverage the Open API spec for each of our services. And that's allowed us to migrate our custom e-commerce platform gradually into Shopify, where we thought about like, okay, what are our interface boundaries? How can we slot in the Shopify platform into those boundaries, um, replacing sort of discrete parts of our application such that we can prioritize value to the customer and value to the business, while maintaining uh, the systems that are working well as sort of decoupled from the Shopify platform.
So stepping back for just a second, on that answer you just gave, I think that a separate thing that I kind of took from it, which was, hey, we got this thing that's working and we can build that. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And what kind of came out of my mind was you actually wanted to go rebuild the site, but had you already been on Remix, had you, or Next or any of these other frameworks and been running a site that you already were happy with, running it at the edge and data that you were happy with, performance you were happy with, you could have just brought that in and done the same thing and put your attention elsewhere. And I think that's actually before joining Shopify, I was a merchant myself, actually. And I think the thing that was so cool for us, which was Shopify gave us the ability to focus on the things that were most important for just us. And that's kind of what I heard from you today, which was we spend our time on we're essentially a subscription company and we spend our time on our subscription thing. And then these other things we're not an edge company. We're not a hosting company. We're not a database company. And so those are those things that you actually were able to offload so that you could focus in. I was my entire dev team we're not as big as ButcherBox, but we weren't small fish either, 10 retail stores and fairly large. So I think that was kind of the cool thing, and always curious from your end, because you guys were doing such interesting boundary pushing stuff, and the level of quality that you put into just making sure that all the code was written well. And it just sounded like, hey, let's approach this as if we're going to only be able to write this one time, and do it the right way. So cool to get that insight. Well, with that, we are more than the questions I had planned for such a great discussion. And David, I want to thank you again for taking the time to chat today. Maybe I'll give it to you for any final words you want to share, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. This is awesome. I think the only thing that I would want to add that I don't know that I got a chance to speak to directly is there's a lot of complexity that's sort of intrinsic to our business because we're shipping perishable products, because we're shipping sort of a build-a-box model. That complexity, you can see it in the size of our dev team. You can see it in the size of, you can see it in the amount of custom software that we've built over the years in order to be able to implement that pattern in a way that could be bootstrapped and remain profitable from the beginning of the company's, from inception. And I'm super, super excited for Shopify to be a point to really revisit a lot of the kind of beliefs that we've built up over time about how we need to run as a business. Maybe we can try something else, and Shopify allows us to do that with less risk. We can try something without investing 6 months to a year in building out an entire set of software in order to experiment with a new merchandising pattern.